Today we will be talking to you about the life and literature of Lord Byron. We'll start off with his life. Lord Byron, otherwise known as George Gordon Byron, was one of the more well-known poets during the Romantic period. Lord Byron was born to Catherine Gordon of Guyte and Captain John Byron. He was born on January 22, 1788. His father squandered his wife's inheritance, was absent for the birth of his only son, and eventually decamped for France, where he died in 1791. In 1879, Byron and his mother moved to Aberdeen. His half-sister now lived with their grandmother. His mother, who had emotional stability issues, raised Byron in an environment where emotions were chaotic. Byron was raised with a nurse who was Presbyterian, which instilled in him a love for the Bible. His early school years helped him to develop a love for reading and history that influenced much of his writing. Byron was said to be very unhappy in his childhood and often isolated himself from others. By his 20th birthday, George Gordon Byron was saddled with debt. Though he was the one to inherit his parents' estate, the property was run down severely and there was no assets to care for the land. Byron was also later known for his fluid sexuality. He discovered sexual freedom while in Greece. He was labeled as bisexual as he fancied both men and women. This attraction to both men and women is partially why Byron isolated himself so heavily.
His start in poetry was due to his love for his cousin Margaret Parker. Her death led him to write on the death of a young lady. He also wrote several poems for Mary Chaworth of Ainslie Hall, his second cousin. These included Hills of Ainslie, The Adieu, and Stanzas to a Lady Leaving England. Byron is most known for his collections Fugitive Pieces and Hours of Idleness, as well as Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. His poem Don Juan is considered one of the greatest long poems in English written since Paradise Lost by John Milton. Fugitive Pieces was Byron's first collection, published anonymously in 1806. Some of the poems were written at the early age of 14. His collection of poems was considered obscene because of some erotic messages as well as ridiculing teachers by name. Fugitive Pieces, in short, was poems about Byron's early relationships and infatuations in life, friendly and romantic. Because of the reactions to the collection, Byron pulled and burned all copies of the book, except for 4 of them, and began to compile a revised version which would not be published in his lifetime. His second collection, Hours of Idleness, received better reactions in comparison to Fugitive Pieces. Some of the poems were addressed to John Edelston, a boy whom Byron loved deeply. Through Hours of Idleness was received, for the most part, a severely negative review in 1808, caused an outpour of negative criticism. His response was satire, English bards, and Scotch reviewers, which received mixed attention.
Publicly humiliated, and with nowhere else to turn, Byron set out on a tour of the Mediterranean, traveling with a friend to Portugal, Spain, Albania, Turkey, and finally Athens. He was deeply inspired by Greece. Here he found not only sexual freedom, but his sense of self as a poet. We see this in a quote he wrote to his sister: "If I am a poet, the air of Greece has made me one." He returned to England a short 2 years later after finishing the opening cantos to Childe Harold's Pilgrimage. The first 2 ended being published in March of 1812. Childe Harold's Pilgrimage was a poem which tells us the story of a world-weary young-looking man for the meaning in the world. The expensive first printing sold out in 3 days. Byron reportedly said, "I awoke one morning and found myself famous." His fame, though, was among the upper class, because only established individuals were educated and read. He released the 3rd cantos in 1818 in response to fan letters written to him after the publication of the first 2 cantos.
In his personal life, Byron was married and divorced. Wife Anne Isabella Milbank accused him of everything from incest to sodomy. Lots of love affairs followed his divorce, including Claire Clairmont, who was Percy Bysshe Shelley's sister-in-law. By 1816, Byron was warned a crowd would lynch him if he was seen in public. He fled from England and settled in Italy. He planned to engage in the Greek fight for independence and planned to join a battle against a Turkish-held fortress, but he fell ill. Byron died April 19, 1824, at the age of 36. He had written a memoir, but his friends burned it.